So we'll go ahead and get started. Dylan, thanks for coming on. I know we've been talking about this for a long time. First time on the stream, hopefully not the last, but thanks again. And
Of course.
first things first, I am going to have to perform some two-factor authentication to make sure you are the real Dylan LeClair, because there's about 50 of them that have tried to follow me. So in the 2016-2017 split season for the Vermont Lumberjacks, what was your jersey number?
Due diligence, geez, 16.
Damn. And also, for the second one, which maple syrup grade selection is best?
Um, uh, I think B grade, A, B. I don't really have a preference.
You passed. We got the real one. Awesome, dude. Well, thanks for having you on. Let me switch screen over to your screen. So anyway, we don't have really an agenda here today, guys. This is the off the schedule from our normal streams, but he's overseas right now, and we wanted to make this happen. So glad it finally happened. And Dylan, how you doing?
Doing great. Happy to be here. I like the format of just kind of riffing off the top. It works for me.
Yeah, same. It's not much. I don't know. I think you get interesting people in the same room, and it's just typical. The um, normal like flow will happen, and you get to see some really good stuff. And then even right now, like this is some of the craziest times. Like this stream couldn't have happened any better. We're doing closing arguments on Sam Bankman Fried. We're doing what 35,000 right now. We're getting close to the halvening, and Jerome's pretty close to reversing.
Yeah, interesting times. Been pretty wild that FTX was like literally almost a year ago today.
It doesn't feel like
Time
it.
flies.
It doesn't feel
No,
like it. Like 15K doesn't feel like it was a year ago.
time does fly. Um, how are you feeling about things? I mean, what's I hate the bullish bearish binary question because it's like it leaves so much nuance out. But I don't know. How are you feeling? What's your thought on the state of things? And then maybe I can give my 2 cents and we can dig into some charts if we want.
I'm kind of uneasy. The it's we haven't seen the bulls and apes show up yet in a very long time, and all of a sudden they're here and they're pumping, and we're not to the halving yet. So I'm sitting here looking at this. We're already at like 35K, and I was like, man, if we get into the 50s, 60s before the halvening, we're really getting into uncharted territory. I know the halvenings, people say they don't matter, and it's not as big of a deal as it was. But man, we've lost a lot of miners and a lot of capitulation. A lot of mining companies have not been successful through this FTX downturn and just overall market downturn. So I'm getting a little nervous because I mean a lot of people got chopped up through this market going down to 15K, and now we're crunching and stuff's happening. And then there's always you see the market moving on every time there's even a tweet about a BlackRock ETF, and I'm just like, man, I are we really going to run it up and then have the ETF go live? That's kind of where I'm at. So it's like, man, or maybe this is nothing, and like we're talking about all time highs that are crazy high, into the next cycle. I don't know. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I've been pleasantly surprised about Bitcoin's run for much of like early 2023. The Nasdaq was printing new highs, sharp ratio of like 2.0 just every day up only. There was like 6 months without like a 1% pullback on equities, and Bitcoin was just kind of just ranging. And I guess in hindsight, the buzzword of the day is gamma squeeze over the past week or two. It's like almost like Katango and some of that jargon in 2021. But what I think, and just kind of what I've gathered from talking with a few people, and a little bit of it is kind of me going out on a limb, but I think what we saw partly, and maybe I share my screen here. Does that work? If do I just share
Yeah, it
via
should
the Zoom or
it should work in Zoom. Yeah, it'll shrink your
okay? So how does that look? You see
looks
it? You
perfect.
seeing? Okay, great. Um, so here's what I'm kind of how I kind of think of it. Throughout 2023, there was basically Bitcoin was just pinned. I mean, I'm not to like I don't need to mansplain TA here, but did nothing, right? Just pinned 30K to 20K equities, making new highs. And what I think was, post Genesis, Genesis, the biggest lending desk, and a lot of the traditional lenders, like even like the hedge fund kind of like Three Arrows Capital, right, was like lending and borrowing in Bitcoin terms, right? BlockFi's, all of them. Like this was like Bitcoin yield, and I know it's not yields, right? Like there's no way to natively get yield on Bitcoin, but I just mean like Bitcoin kind of native credit markets. And there wasn't that. That all went like poof with FTX and everything else going down late 2022. So after that, essentially, the only like the quote unquote yield that everyone printed on, from like March onwards was selling calls or like the options market. And if you like look at just notional options open interest versus futures open interest, that was 2023 was pretty historic because options open interest like surpassed futures. And I think it's happened maybe like briefly for a time or two, but this was like very clearly a trend that hadn't like persisted for like as long as it did this year. And I don't have the Glassnode stats up here, but this is the top chart here is Bitcoin implied volatility, right? So it's like this is like the Bitcoin VIX. Are you familiar with BVIV?
I don't use it, but I've seen it before.
Yeah, there's the guys at Volmex. The Cole's their CEO and founder. He's a cool guy. But it's like it's a 24/7 365 VIX, and I'm pretty sure I haven't dug into there's a whole white paper on it. And it's some real like kind of quant style math, but I'm pretty sure it's meant to be like exactly calculated like the VIX is, but for Bitcoin, rolling 24/7 365 using derivative options. So I mean, look like Bitcoin 27, 28K, 37 on BVIV. Now we're basically double that, a little bit less. But in equities, like you don't see vol pump and you don't see the VIX go up and SPX go up at once. You don't see S&P 500 or like broadly equities go up when the implied vol, kind of like risk gauge goes haywire. And that's what we just saw, right? Which like breaks a lot of minds when they're, as like a macro TradFi guy, you're looking at this Nasdaq's down 3%, S&P's down 3%, like 10%, 20% from the highs, and Bitcoin has a 30% week out of nowhere. And they're like, what is going on? And I think part of that's just Bitcoin's obviously super illiquid, and that like illiquidity cuts both ways. So that's kind of why the gamma squeeze buzzword has gained some popularity. But I am also a bit cautious. A lot of the kind of the leading indicators, kind of again, a week of kind of decorrelation or outperformance, and everybody's like, holy shit, Bitcoin, there is no second best. Macro doesn't matter, including myself, right? Like I like a good hopium tweet every once in a while too. But I still think it's very much tied into the legacy world, right? If you're just looking at like, I have a bunch of layouts here. I'm going to go through them. Fed, let's see, 2-year. 2-year Fed funds. Let's see, some of these are better than others. All right, so like here is the tightening cycle, right? Fed funds 2-year, kind of looking at the state of it, right? We can see like when the market's kind of calling the Fed's bluff and saying, hey, this thing's over, right? So the Fed, the market's kind of saying, hey, like this tightening cycle's over, 2 years under the Fed funds rate, right? We've seen a pretty good move the last couple of days in the 2-year, but look at the S&P 500, right? Put it in log. Look at the S&P 500 the last few times that the Fed cut, right? Like I get the narrative, like Fed cut rates, juice Bitcoin, but the Fed's not cutting because things are good.
No.
So that's where I'm a little bit like, yes, ETF, yes, halving, of course, yes, supplies historically constrained, and yes, the narrative is absolutely money of you have to print, they're running crazy deficits, unprecedented deficits, and the bond issuance, the bond performance is historic. But at the same time, we've basically papered over, including COVID, right, which was like a 6-month business cycle, not even. It's like a 2-month business cycle. We papered over basically like 15 years of business cycles with QE and money printing. And if we're going to wean back on that, or at least that's what they're attempting, right? 5.5% rates. You didn't really feel it all 2022 because inflation was like 9, 8, 7, 6. Now inflation's, 3, right? 4. Like that's actually the monetary policies that for the first time in 15 years is actually tight. And we're just starting to see that get priced in my opinion. So it's not saying Bitcoin can't go up, right? Like, and again, I hold like a disproportionate amount of Bitcoin for my net worth, and I'm young, so I don't mind the volatility. But like, even if the ETF gets passed, even if the halving's coming in April, right? Like, if markets all are going down, if there's a spike in unemployment, like if we see an actual business cycle trough, you know, Bitcoin's obviously also going to react to that, and like I think that should be welcomed. At the same time, the admin is a debt junkie, and they're just like to go haywire. So I think they have they got $1 trillion to drain from the reverse repo, and then from there, once when they go on this kind of debt binge, they're gonna have to source the liquidity from somewhere. You're either gonna have to source it from you're gonna have to pull that capital from like global markets, or to issue all that coupon, long duration or short duration debt, you're gonna have to like pull that liquidity from somewhere. And that's like we've been kind of just like post COVID detached from reality. I mean, really post Great Financial Crisis. And so, like I will admittedly say, like when the tightening cycle started, I was like, okay, this thing's gonna get bad. We're gonna see a recession in late 2022. Totally wrong on that call, or not the call, but like I guess the timing of it. Wrong timing or wrong call, one and the same. But I don't think the thesis is invalidated that like they always swing this pendulum too far in one direction on the dovish side and the hawkish side.
True, and
Like they
they
juice
look
the
backwards.
markets.
They look
They look
backwards.
backwards, right?
Yeah, and the the biggest concern I have with that is Jerome has made it very clear what he wants to see, and he's not there yet. He's getting closer, but I don't think he's going to get to the point he wants without breaking things in the system. There's too many things that are upside down right now that are struggling. Like we've seen how many banks die off so far, and we've got more banks that are just struggling. Um, the bonds are going crazy as well, and then like the debt cycle. Like I'm used to like seeing debt like, oh, these are crazy numbers, but like they're getting real crazy, like debt spirals. Like we're getting to the close to the point where I was like, I don't see how you can do this and keep the dollar. Like I don't like. I was like, if they keep going up at these rates, like something's got to break, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. I think the thing, and this is where I always enjoy like the Luke Groman, Brett Johnson, kind of back and forth on Twitter. I think he's like Santiago. I forget what his Twitter handle is, but like the dollar milkshake guy, and they're always going back and forth on Twitter about. Hold up, let me pull up the dollar here. Try to get a blank slate. Gosh, I'll pull out a new layout. They're always going back and forth on Twitter about like, yeah, the U.S. is totally fucked. Pardon my French.
No, we're good.
but but so is every. Oh wait, well, not XJX, DXY. But so is everyone. And so when you're looking at like the U.S. fiscal position, it's like, oh god, this is just brutal. But then you look at the EU and you look at Japan and you look at literally China, which is a black box like from an economic standpoint, and you're like, well, yeah, but they're all screwed. So I think the dollar hegemony thing is less of it's from a relative standpoint with other fiats. The dollar can still be like quote unquote strong. You know what I mean? Like the dollar can still be like quote unquote king for fiats, but I think in relative terms to like, and maybe this is cliche, but like hard money, like basically gold, Bitcoin, I maybe could like see the Zoltan hypothesis of like a broad basket of commodities. Like I don't think that really works long time frame, but just more of like the trend of okay, like peak financialization, peak paper markets happened basically in COVID, right? Like this is the long bond, this is like peak financialization, right? And then you look at like let's just say oil, or we could do like a commodity index. What's it called? The JF something. I forget. One second here. Commodities. TRJ. Yeah. Like here's a commodities basket, right? So like peak paper markets versus like, peak short it, or not short, but like basically, the opposite of a global bond bubble, which is, a massively undervalued commodity sector, real assets. And so I think that trend can just continues, right? It's like, oh shoot, Japan's printing, Europe's printing, the US is printing. And so, it's like everybody is like, oh, the dollar's screwed. It's like, yeah, well, so is everyone. So I think that's where it's really interesting because like essentially the Fed's tightening and they're gonna fuck the rest of the world before they fuck the US, right? They're gonna put like the Treasury is the most as crazy as it sounds, and there's a few corporates that trade inside. Crazily enough, there's a few corporates that trade inside the US Treasury spread. Like I think the Microsofts and Apples of the world have briefly kind of the yield on those bonds have flipped inside the US, which is like historically has never happened. But right, they have a money printer, right? So there's no one more credit worthy in a global financing crunch credit risk off event than the Treasury in theory, right? And so all these other nations, especially the ones that are using the dollar, are going to be screwed first. And that's where they could tighten and just basically pull liquidity and bankrupt the world. It's like,
Absolutely.
yeah, bonds have like fallen 50%, right? So anybody that's holding the bonds, including China and maybe our adversaries, like the Russians of the world, have sold their treasuries, right? Because they got sanctioned.
Yeah.
But right, you're essentially pulling capital. Not like, yeah, the U.S. domestic investors have lost out, but so has like everybody geopolitically. You issued bonds at 100 and now they're at 50, so you can buy them back, you can do all this stuff. So I do think they're in a really tight spot, but at the same time, like I I don't think of imminent collapse comes tomorrow. Like Bitcoin can go to 500K and the system can still be standing, which is like I think the craziest part about all this.
Yeah, and it's back to like the countries that are struggling even worse. You're right. Like, yeah, fiat's not doing so hot, but the the other ones in comparison to the USD are dying way worse. And then the countries that owe debt in dollars, they don't have a money printer, but we do, or like the United States does. So like that's the problem, right? Like, or maybe it's not the problem, but it's definitely the defect in the system where it's vulnerable, in my opinion. Um, and that's kind of the other
Yep.
thing is with all these issues with fiat, I was expecting um, metals to do better. Like we didn't see gold just skyrocket in regards to like the inflation numbers that were coming in. And you figured like people would be trying to find flights for safety. You're like, well, let's bring in the old one. Let's do gold. And it's not like I mean, it's yeah, it's doing better, but like it's not skyrocketing like you would think it is. So people have been trying to like run to safe havens, and then you see bonds get destroyed, and you're like, man, like I'm sitting here watching charts where Doge is less volatile than some of these bonds, and I'm just like, this is weird. Like this is not what I'm used to. Um, so
Yep.
I'm still a believer. Like I'm waiting for something to break for TradeFi. I've been hedged for probably 2 years now. Just I'm waiting for the entry because I just the list of items Powell's wants to fix are not fixed yet, and I think there's probably more pain coming. And my gut suspicion is that it should have happened about this time, but the AI pump in the S and
Yep.
P got leveraged, and we went crazy. And now that's kind of tapering off. Nvidia, like you saw, went to an insane market cap, and now it's rolling over. Um,
Yep.
so I liked I know you were you got a lot of hate for shorting that, but
Yeah.
it's true. I mean, it's just like well, it's this stuff can only go so high before I guess the sky's not really the limit on that type of hardware. But shout out to Nvidia. They supplied the Ethereum run until 2.0, and then AI hit, so they just bowed up.
Yep. No, I mean AI is amazing,
It is.
obviously, anybody that's used it. But like at the same time, there is a basis in reality for a lot of this stuff, right? And And when you're seeing like this is just like echoes of 2021, where like you can love Tesla, right? But you can also, if you understand like finance and how this stuff works, totally recognize that the $1 trillion market cap was a result of like degenerate gamma squeezes and call option speculation, right? You have Nvidia in a couple months back doing more index and options volume than the SPY index, right? The index of 500 companies, like the one of the biggest ETFs, if not the biggest ETF. I don't know. I'm guessing it's one of the biggest. Probably TLT, SPY, like those
Yeah.
those types, is doing more volume, shares traded, volume in options and dollar terms than the index of the biggest 500 companies. So it's like, and that's not a typical thing. Like that's not common. So like again, just like these valuations of you're like, okay, well, yeah, it's going to be huge, but okay, it's a trillion, $2 trillion, right? Like at some point you need a marginal buyer to keep this thing going, and like it rolls over. So like again, the when I see the Nasdaq pumping and it's really basically just seven companies, it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, these are like obviously the biggest companies in the world, and they're super dominant and they're not going anywhere. But at the same time, like
You're not going to
equities
triple
are
their market caps.
yeah,
Like
they're
it's not
not
going
going
to
to triple their
happen.
market caps. And like if you're looking at just like the Russell, right, or like small caps, they're at their lows. They're at the 2022 lows. So it's like you have 30% of the equity market that doesn't make money. They're cash flow negative. So and like a lot of this debt financing was kicked down the can for a few years. Like it's not an imminent credit crunch. Just look at credit spreads, right? There's not really stress there, but this stuff slowly seeps into the system, right? When you have bond yields that for like investment grade corporates at, I don't even know, 8-9%, right? Like mortgages at 8%, just like at the margin of eventually like this stuff seeps in, and it's taken a while. And I don't like, and really including myself, right? I'm looking at this from a historical lens. Like I haven't lived through a full tightening cycle, or I guess I did, but I was 7 years old, and so, but from a historical like perspective, they don't just be like, oh yeah, SP 500 to the moon. We're gonna just like juice this thing before there's any pain. And like there really hasn't been any pain, right? Like ARC and the crypto sector and all the Ponzi's imploded, and commercial real estate, because of COVID and all that imploded. But like, there really hasn't been all that much pain. Unemployment's like barely off a tick from historical lows. And that's again, inflation data, job data. Like if you believe that, take it at face value. But that's what they're looking at, right? So that's what I kind of just take it at face value. I'm trying to pull up bond yields here. Where is it? Corporate credit. This is that's high yield. Options adjusted spread. This is high yield, but let me pull up the actual effective yield. This is high yield. I mean, high yield credit, right? Like 9%. Let's look at an investment grade. I mean, this is basically just this is basically just like government debt, but like, look at this investment grade debt, right? So does it totally doesn't matter, right? I guess if you want to think like, but I think just at the margin, these things slowly eat away, and the longer that they stay at 5.5%, the more that this is slowly going to seep in, and the more that there's going to be at least some form of pain felt. So like, yeah, I have a ton of Bitcoin, but I also like don't feel bad about holding a little bit of cash. Like in 2020 and 2021, I had over 100% of my net worth in Bitcoin, and I'm slowly stacking and also stacking cash. And like I sleep great at night, with that buffer. I think a lot of people would be good to do the same. We have real yields for the first time in like forever. So yeah, like I mean, if you want to YOLO everything into Bitcoin, like you've done great this year. But at the same time, like there's the big money managers aren't going to do that. If you're retail, obviously you can do that, or a Bitcoin crypto fund, like you can do that. But at the same time, like most people don't really have any disposable income, right? So like doing that isn't really the prudent thing
That's showing up
to
in the
do.
stats a lot right now.
Very much
The
so.
credit card stats as well as the savings of that. And I think that's also why you're seeing the Russell struggle so bad is these smaller companies can't handle this expensive the cost of loans, right? Like these APRs going that high is just crushing people. Um,
Yep.
and
Yeah,
it's
and like COVID kind of this cycle was so interesting. And again, I'm saying this from a historical perspective, like the case studies of previous debt bubbles and debt cycles and asset bubbles. The historical analogs for this kind of everything bubble, right, where literally every money, the cost of money was negative, everything was to the moon, and there was trillions of excess stimulus juiced into the system that had nowhere to go, right? Like 2 trillion in excess uh, capital parked in reverse repo, right? Like excess household savings. Like you had the PPP like corporate scam basically where people just got free money and it was like, oh, here's a loan, and it's like, oh yep, it's a grant, right? So you had all this excess stimulus that's sloshing around, and so when it was like, okay, well, we're going to go from zero interest rate policy for 15 years to 5% rates, a lot of people, including myself at first, were like, oh shit, this is going to break immediately. And as I learned, as like the data started coming in, it was like, oh wait, the economy is actually a bit resilient. And I think a lot of that was because of, you saw like JP Morgan had some good stuff on like the excess consumer savings dwindling down, right? Like historically low savings rates, but they had such a big buffer from like literally just free funny money stimulus in 2020. So that has waned down, right? And a lot of that, similarly in the corporate sector too. So it's going to be pretty interesting just to see. I'm really excited for 2024 because you're going to have just a whole bunch of things like probably the ETF approval, right? Probably, well, definitely the halving, and probably recession and presidential election all in one year, right?
yes,
So it's going to be like super volatile, and that's as a trader, like what more can you ask for?
yeah, yeah, and it's like I keep thinking is like it's 2024 is where we kind of like like every day we're closer to the end of the bear market, right? Like it's eventually good times are going to come. You could argue that hey, the Fed always manages to save it somehow. Albeit I think that timeline is that we'll see. I don't think we're going to pivot yet. I don't think in the first 2 quarters, but who knows? They can change tunes real quick, but like you said, the ETF is the thing. Um, I don't know how to gauge it. Like I'm my gut wise, like I mean, are we just gonna say ETF approved, moon, 100K, 100K? You know, I don't think that's how BlackRock rolls, but I would be glad to be wrong. And then also, we've got to see what like this like. I guess what are your thoughts on like central bank liquidity in regards to like Bitcoin prices? Like, there's a lot of
Yeah,
dynamics there.
well, regarding the ETF, like, and this is still a contrarian take, and again, I'm not like 100% sure of this. It's just my gut tells me that and people think that when I bring this stuff up or just raise the points that I'm suggesting that Binance and Tether are going to like implode, collapse, Armageddon, FTX style. I think a lot of people have PTSD from that, and they're thinking that every analogy or every even question posed or warning or whatever is like suggesting that imminent collapse is coming. That's not what I'm saying. But when you see the previous ETF denials, I mean, why was the ETF denied for literally 10 years? Yeah, 10 years, right? The Winklevoss accepted it in 2013. And obviously the market wasn't ready then. It was much, less liquidity, much more, much less transparency, very shady. The Winklevoss proposal was just like their own, they were the custodian, they were the index price. Like it was never going to get past then. But if you look at recently, 2021, 22, earlier this year, you can quite literally read what the SEC was saying. It's like they list a few 7, 8 line items, and some of them are just dumb legal speak of like, if the Bitcoin network gets hacked, like what risk mitigation, like some of that dumb like legal talk, and then some of it's like straight up wash trading, market manipulation, fraudulent activity at crypto exchanges, money laundering, and fraudulent stable coins like Tether, straight up listing Tether, right? Like I'm not saying Tether's a fraud. That's their language. And so when I think of like, okay, well, Larry Fink's going on TV and saying crypto's great. And he's not saying that because he doesn't want to just say Bitcoin. You can't just say Bitcoin or like, outright chill the thing. But he's like, oh, it's a safe haven, institutional asset, saying all the buzzwords. It's clear that there's client demand for the thing, obviously. But I don't think, and maybe again, I could be totally wrong here, but I don't think that you have the US DOJ and I mean, straight up, like the SEC and CFTC have already sued Binance, but I don't think the DOJ, who at the end of 2022, I was saying like DOJ is coming for Binance. Well, so is SEC and CFTC. Like all these three-letter agencies are obviously, given the precedent of FTX and SAM, going to quite literally go after now the basically only market player left, and the guy that Sam literally copied, that like the FTX model was literally like copying Binance. Obviously some differences, and I think CZ is much more savvy, and he has a much larger monopoly, I guess you could say. But right, like the $30 billion exchange token in the middle of this thing, the volumes, right, like the wash trading, like the liquidity isn't real, right? And I'll pull it up. This is pretty hilarious to see.
No, I agree with that.
At least on
And
this,
I do a lot of quant trading stuff as well, and I do a lot of bot trading. And something I noticed years ago is like, hey, I've got these bots that work on most assets, but they don't work on FTT and they don't work on BNB. It's like something's off. Like, and I was like, I
yep,
couldn't explain it. So I started talking to some other friends who code, and they're like, yeah. And we actually started having issues where we could take bots that worked on Coinbase and put them on FTX, and they would quit working. And so then we were like, okay, FTT's messed up, and so are FTX order books. Like they're not real. And we're like, man, it's got to be backdoored to Alameda, because you could sit there and watch, and it's like, God help you if you shorted FTT on FTX, you'd get sniped. And you'd see the same thing a little bit, but not as bad on Binance. If like people had BNB shorts, you were going to get liquidated. Like it was gnarly. And then everything falls apart and people figure it out. But I I I'm concerned with Binance, but at the same time, I want CZ to make it. I really like their program. It's going to hurt the industry if they go down. I'd like to think they're very much legit. I think a lot of it with the BNB stuff has value or is valid. And the problem I have with it is they have every access to every PR team and lawyer available, and their response to most criticisms is just memes. Hey, it's Safu Ford. I'm like, dude, like come out and say some like legit stuff. Show us some data.
yep,
Like,
yep.
you obviously won't step foot in the United States for a reason. Like, can you address that? And then they'll do memes. And it's like, man, this ain't
Yeah.
that's
Well,
I've got
yeah,
some issues
and
with
he would
that.
be arrested, And I'm not suggesting that Binance is like people are like, oh, there's 500,000 Bitcoin on Binance, they're not FTX, and I'm like, I literally am saying that. I agree, right? But the whole point that I'm saying is like, if you were there's like just a million little red flags, like for instance, the BUSD thing. Over they have a bridge to BNB chain, and they put in Paxos issued BUSD from Ethereum, and they create a billion or 2 billion at times more BUSD in the peg out than they had in the peg in, right? Essentially minting new tokens out of thin air. Well, Pax, they literally got ordered to wind down their $20 billion stablecoin because of that, right? But they didn't just do it with BUSD. They did it. I like spent 100 hours, being a total autist in the Internet Archive and their wallet addresses looking at this stuff. And they did it with Ethereum. They did it with Bitcoin. They actually supposedly maintained it, but they were using for Tether, USDC, BUSD, Ethereum, and a bunch of other shitcoins. They were just using their stated in the proof of reserves wallet addresses for the peg-in, right? So you have your client addresses, but then you also are issuing a new token on the other side that's backed by these addresses, right? And it's not one-to-one backed. It's like saying, I have a wallet with 100 Bitcoin. That's all my customers have right here, or 100 Ethereum. And then, oh, I'm also going to create a new pegged version of Ethereum on BNB. And I'm going to create 50 Ethereum. And it's backed by this same 100 wallet, the same 100 ETH, right? And you're like, shouldn't you just segregate that? Like they call it proof of collateral. And it's
Yeah.
like, why are you 3x over collateralizing, right? You should just 1-to-1 peg. And so like stuff like that, is like, it's just, I look at it and I'm like, again, they have like 50 billion of notional assets in their platform. I get it, right? But like take a peek at this. This is a funny chart.
And that's kind of a
BNB,
lot of the same
BTC.
stuff that like Barry Silbert's getting criticized of, and it's like, yeah, they have the assets, but it's illiquid because it's tied up in something else that's wrapped, and it's like, well, that's not the same thing, bud. And we'll see if they survive it. But I don't, as much as I like Silbert for the memes, I don't think he's gonna make it.
Yep. I mean, like take a look at when BUSD uh topped, right? That there's not the, I think the trading view or one of them has a long history, but BNB topped in Bitcoin terms, which I think is really the important thing to look at when you're looking at the exchange rate. At the same day that their stablecoin that they were again fraudulently rehypothecating, right? So it's obvious that CZ pumped the thing, right? Like you can just look at the volume profiles. He pumped the thing just like Sam did. Not saying he's insolvent or whatever, but he pumped the thing. There's not really structural buyers here, other than like speculators looking for a flip. But like you're saying, it's a fake market, right? Obviously, I can look at the price action too. During days that Bitcoin dumped the hardest, BNB, which was like literally hyper beta all of 21, 22, or all of 20 and 2021, hyper beta, right? Like 3x the realized vol of Bitcoin. Bitcoin dumps 10% and BNB is down 2%. And Bitcoin pumps 30% and BNB is now up 3 or 4. And it's like, why is this thing just slowly bleeding out and no longer beta anymore? It's like, well, obviously, like someone's hyper managing the exchange rate because, I mean, look at the thing. It's like,
It moves
look at this
weird. It
chart.
moves really weird. And the other thing I've noticed with it is like FTT always acted like it had a line in the sand, and then we find out from Caroline, yeah, they did. You'll see
Yep.
BNB for a while. They defended 250 like hell, like that.
Yep.
You couldn't break through it, and now they're finally going back, and maybe they are leveraged. I don't know, but the one thing I will say is I hope to God CZ's taken the time since the FTX collapse and made himself bulletproof. Like I don't see why you wouldn't try to move everything back to 1-to-1 after we saw FTX get bank run on, right?
Yep.
You
Yeah.
know,
What do you think about like this is what and maybe we can go talk about Binance like all day, or we could shift to something else. Up to you.
Kraken,
Um,
my boy Jesse Powell. I love
I love
Kraken.
Jesse.
I do
He's
too.
he's a good guy. But what do you think like around Binance? Like the things that I not don't understand, but that's curious to me is the stablecoin stuff, right? So you saw the BUSD thing, but then Silicon Valley Bank fails, USDC depegs temporarily. Right at the Signature Bank is taken out that weekend too, crazy weekend,
Yeah.
and they list TUSD, which we find out after the fact is bought by Justin Sun. Immediately, a billion of this thing gets minted, and immediately zero fee trading for TUSD. And so this chart I'm pulling up here at the bottom that I was showing for a little bit originally is it's in log too. This is Binance's. I compare it to I take BTC TUSD, BTC FDUSD, and BTC USDT, and basically it's just whatever one that has a zero fee promo, right? And I get it, it's all wash trading, but and I compare it to Kraken, Coinbase, Bitstamp, Gemini, like basically the four US onshore volumes. And Binance, as of now, the last day, is doing 500% more in volume than those institutions. And so circling back to the ETF thing, the things they cited of like market manipulation, wash trading, stables, it's like, what's backing FDUSD? What's backing TUSD? And they're doing 5x more volume than Coinbase, the leading US spot pair. And for me, the tether truth thing is like, I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole and like raise the red flags or whatever, but I think people have been beating that horse for a while. Like they don't show QSIP, so we know. But like these small little stables, like FDUSD has a $500 million market cap and is doing $2 billion of trading volume on BTC pair alone. So like, why is CZ promoting these tiny little stable coins with a zero fee promo? Like you have a monopoly anyway. You know, like why are you giving zero fees? Like in 2022, he was like, fuck it, zero fees on Tether market making. And everyone's like, what? Holy shit. And to me, like that was just like it kind of was like I felt like he was trying to pull liquidity away from FTX, like strategically, or not FTX, just like anybody, anywhere, like come to Binance. Okay, it makes sense. But now you're the monopoly. Like why the zero fee trading thing to me is a bit weird because like what's the incentive to do that? You know
No,
what I
there's
mean?
actually like there has to be something there because with the amount of bot trading, like there's a lot of strategies that do not work with even the slightest fee. But if you open up feeless trading,
Mm,
bots just go nuts, and you saw that in the volumes. The volumes just exploded when you turned that on. But
yep.
that costs him money. Like the amount of backend you have to beef up your servers to manage that many API handshakes is just absurd. So I agree with that, and to your point with Justin, I'm always skeptical of him. Like if you go down the your board and you actually start reading the Adam Cock, whatever his name is, Cochran, the multi thread dude, he'll go off on some
Yep.
tangents on Justin Sun, and it's not far stretched. Like it actually is. Like here's some paper trails that are kind of like this is weird.
Oh, he's a fraud. Yeah. I mean, Justin Sun's a fraud. Like
Yeah, and he looks extreme. Like I don't know how to say it, but he looks really waterproof, and that kind of throws me off. But
yeah.
he's sketchy dude, and the other thing is like there's not really a reason to have more than two or three stable coins. Period. Like why? I mean, why? Like other than you're trying to hide stuff, right? Like I get it. Maybe have a USDT, USDC, and then maybe a algorithmic stable coin that's yet to really shown up, but it's USDT stood the test of time. It's depegged before. I remember when it was 90 cents for like 2 weeks back in the day, but you know, they're not dead yet. And it's pretty legit in my opinion, but I don't know. I can't see their books. But you're right. Like we don't need 10 stable coins. Like it just doesn't make sense to me. Other than it opens the door to fraud. Cause then you even have to to do your order books, your liquidity in the order books gets screwed up. Cause I remember, I forgot who did it, or they never said who did it, but like back in like 2017, someone sent Bitcoin to 100K on the Paxos pair because they fat fingered, I think, $3 million on a market buy. And it just went boop because it had no liquidity. I think there was like 50 grand worth of liquidity in that entire order book. And they blipped the hell out of it. So congratulations, six figures confirmed, but that dude
Yeah.
took a loss. So I don't know. I agree. I don't like it.
That's another really interesting point, and I think that that's something I brought up is if we remember, and not to like do the whole like FTX equals Binance thing. I'm not saying that, but the narrative in 2021 and 2022, and like even I got like I think guys in the weeds like you who are like literally scripting up these bots trading like in the market are like this I can't really put my finger on it, but this is fishy. But the notion was like Alameda's this quant fund, they're raking money, like FTX is like sponsoring the Super Bowl ads and like doing the Miami Heat arena thing, and Sam's a billionaire and one of the richest people in the world under 30 because they're just absolutely raking and have a money printing machine, both FTX and Alameda. And obviously we come to find out they were completely incompetent, right? Just blowing money, just careless, whatever. But people were fooled for a long time thinking like, okay, well, yeah, duh, if you have proprietary data on this black box derivatives exchange and you can basically trade against it. And even before we found out that they had like the unlimited collateral like feature, right? I always kind of presumed that there was a back door for basically, some form of like, borrow or credit line or whatever, where you could just like, oh yeah, like there's 100,000 Bitcoin on this exchange. Like I can, as a market maker, just like basically take all the theoretical capital and just like wipe out one side of the order book on a derivative pair or whatever. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you basically have the hand of God if you have a black box and access to like all this capital. And so the notion was like they're printing money because they're just wiping everybody out, making money on both sides. And so when I think about like Binance, not so much Binance because I know it's like way better execution than FTX, way better liquidity, yada yada yada. But you have a BTC, a BNB, and a USDT, and like increasingly like the TUSD and other stablecoin pairs for literally every single asset. And then you have certain like crypto cross asset pairs, and you have that for a derivative and for a USDT derivative and a coin margin derivative. So you have like for like literally every shitcoin in the book. So you have like I don't even know how many separate trading pairs to manage, both spot and derivative. And so when I think of like, who was buying liquidations candles in 2021, Bitcoin flash crash from 50K to 30K in like 2 days, and it was just like epic. And we find out like, Alameda's catching knives and they're taking losses and all this stuff. To me, I think, especially with like, in the face of like BNB going from like $30 to 600 in like, a year, I'm like, well, that was obviously a fake market. But, what other, like, were they ever caught on the wrong side of a trade? Like, because we now know, and I presumed this beforehand, but CZ was coming in with his, quote unquote, like market makers, the hedge funds, Sigma Chain and Merit Peak. And, both on we know this for Binance US, but I presume because it's the same operation, Binance.com as well, is doing a lot of this internal market making, is providing the liquidity. He's even admitted it, right?
Yeah,
But
he's
it's pretty
named the
hard.
funds now that actually like his market makers. He's actually naming them now because I used to look for him back in the day, could never get any information on it.
Yeah. And it's pretty hard to like, I don't want to say fake a market because I mean, I know there's real traders, right? But I think we can say with a decent amount of confidence, just based on what we know from the SEC and CFTC stuff with Binance US, right? Where like they were quite literally bootstrapping these pairs with like 90% of the liquidity. Like for a lot of these coins, right, there's not really any liquidity. So like you have to not fake a market, right? But like if you're providing liquidity for like very illiquid crypto pairs across like 3 spot pairs, 3 derivative pairs, cross crypto pairs, like it's tough, right? And a margin loan system. And so, just a month ago, it was like an SEC sealed document with a bunch of stuff redacted. They were referring to in a Binance US case of a Sigma chain shortfall. And it's like the king of crypto has a market maker that quote unquote from CZ in a space doesn't make any profits. And he was saying it like, don't worry, guys, we don't make profits. Like, we're altruistic. But they have a shortfall. And so, like, who knows? 50 million. Like, I'm not saying it's systemic. They're not Alameda 2.0. Who knows? But I think the notion that, like, CZ and Binance, like, I know they have 500,000 Bitcoin on the exchange. I know they're the biggest crypto exchange. But running that sort of operation at that size and also making all those markets is quite the task, right? And CZ is like an extremely smart guy. He's savvy as hell, much more than Sam is. So I'm not saying, again, I'm not trying to make this comparison, but I just think that it's possible when we look back with the benefit of hindsight in 5 years or 10 years. And I don't think they're going to go down via a la FTX, but I think it's very probable that they go the way of BitMEX, where they're still around, right? Maybe or maybe not CZ's in the lead role, or maybe it's someone else, right? But their dominant position in the market, both because of US regulation, the spot ETF, maybe Coinbase takes a little bit of market share. But I think the relative size of the Binance, story kind of goes the way of the BitMEX thing, where US DOJ, whatever, come in, they don't, fireball crash, but it's more so like, okay, you're doing 90% of the crypto volume Bitcoin stuff right now. Larry Fink and the boys are coming in, 3-letter agencies are coming in. Maybe there's a settlement or something, but like this whole operation is going to be relatively a lot smaller in a world where the US traditional institutions put in $100 billion into Bitcoin. Like that's just my genuine take. Like I don't have any inside info here. And I'm not to be like a bear doomer or whatever. I have no vendetta against CZ at all, none. And I honestly, it's incredibly impressive what was built in frickin' the span of 6 years. So like
Absolutely, and
props.
he's not cosplaying like like Sam was. Like he's legit intelligent and runs his stuff. And I used to read his
Yep.
like reports and blogs, and he was like thankful for the 2018 bear market because he's like Binance was growing so fast. He's like we couldn't build it. Like because if Bitcoin kept going up past 20, he's like I'm not sure what
But we can
happened.
pivot from the whole Binance thing. I'm not trying to go on a tangent or whatever, but I think my position on Binance is like a bit misunderstood just because I was posting about it. It's more so like, again, I'm not calling for like a cataclysmic event. I think
No,
just people
no.
should like
Be
understand
skeptical.
like, yeah,
It's like
you
there's
know,
so many people. Like that's one thing that amazes me. Like you want to do lessons learned. Like what did FTX do right? They had a hell of a presentation and they cosplayed it to the T. They acted
yep.
like they were the greatest things ever. Quant funds, MIT, all this stuff. I'm doing this because I drive a Toyota Corolla and wear New Balance shoes. Even though when you see his mansion that was listed in Bahamas in the closet, there's not a single fucking New Balance. But he's cosplaying. Like he literally cosplaying. Like
Yep.
they did that so well. And what was amazes me is like anybody who called him out on crypto Twitter, dwarves of like swarms of people would attack and be like, dude, everyone would attack. Like I'm like there was like I know of like less than 5 of them, and like people used to just think, hey, I'm painting rainbows and talking like a conspiracy theorist about Alameda, and then all this stuff like ends up rolling through. But like Coin Mamba was one of them.
I
Um,
remember that. He got shit on so hard.
he did, and he's gonna get to send him letters in jail, so that's gonna be awesome. But like that was the other thing I never understood is people defended FTX like Sam was their literal brother, and I don't understand how they pulled that off. Because I warned a lot of people, and we managed to get some people out. Some of the Rainbow Trends crew like got out of it like literally hours before. I was like, hey guys, this
Nice.
this stuff's looking like it really is fraudulent, and you can obviously see CZ's taking a shot at him and draining the FTT liquidity. It's like there's no reason not to protect yourself and miss out on a month of trading and just put all this stuff in your hard wallet. And man, people argued with it like, why would I do that? Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, dude, you've got you're gonna send your funds overseas to where you can't like sue that exchange, dude. Put it in a Trezor, put it in a hard wallet, do something. Like, there's no reason to risk it. Like,
Yep.
they go down, they don't owe you anything. They don't even exist
Yeah.
in your country. So I think
Big,
that's part of the
big.
BlackRock too. Is people are gonna find safety there? Like I'm safe.
Yep.
So
Yeah. I mean, honestly though, like pretty legendary. I think it. I don't want to call it a miscalculation, but I think one of the things that he didn't kind of expect was the regulatory blowback and the just the spotlight being completely on him, CZ, after that move. But gotta give him props, like legendary bluff call there. Just like, oh, actually, your $3 billion shitcoin that you're like defending basically in your own perps market. Yeah, like I'm gonna FUD it, I'm gonna quote tweet it, I'm gonna compare it to Luna and like jab at it, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna dump 500 million a spot, which like there's no way in hell you can absorb. And pretty legendary stuff. And that was craziest like week ever of like CoinDesk balance sheet to like 5 days later,
oh,
boom,
dude, the
implode.
I about spit out my drink when I read Caroline tweet that. She
I
doesn't
know.
tweet
And
much,
then
and
you
I
look at
was
the
like,
chart and you look at the volume profile and you're like, oh my God.
it's like, are you for real? Like I cannot believe she did that. And then like the court proceedings talks about like their internal Slack chat about it. Like I'm gonna tweet, price is gonna go up, and I'm like, y'all were handling billions of dollars, and you spent less than 50 minutes on the tweet that sealed your fate. Like y'all are impressive. Yeah, it's insane. I mean, it's got like Luna be about the only other one that can do that chart. Um,
Yeah.
that's crazy. It's insane, and it's still trading for some reason. But I just I don't know. And what sucks too is like I don't understand is like there were red flags all over the place. Like Ryan Salami in the Alameda team was dirty as hell, and like that stuff got leaked, not leaked, but it came to public, and people whatever, they're cool, blah blah blah. Caroline was literally posting about amphetamine use while managing FTX and Alameda funds, and people were like,
Yeah.
it's cool, she's Berkeley, whatnot, da 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 da, and it's like and then Sam is literally shaking during interviews with what was it, Insom, that uh the amphetamine patch thing, like to help concentrate,
Ah,
and it's just like there's some signs here you guys are really going hard on, but
yep.
anyway, it's such a mess, and it's just one of those things. Like I knew it was bad. I could see stuff like coding and whatnot. Like this is tainted books and stuff. And then these like court transcripts come out, and you're like, it's 10 times worse than I even thought. Like it's just like I hope he goes to jail, but it's gonna piss me off if the others don't. Like I don't think he could possibly get off on this, but like I don't think Trabucco's ever coming in. And
I think he's a rat. I think he's a rat, like probably a federal informant. To be honest, I think he got a sweetheart deal.
he's the other ones that have that deal had to testify to get the deal. So like Gary Wang had to go be a witness.
Like, how is he just absent of the? I'm not like a legal guy. You know, it's probably the weakest part about all of my analysis or whatnot, commentary, I guess, if you will, is like I'm just not a, I ChatGPT helps me interpret some of these court docs because I'm just reading Chinese. You know what I mean? It's like what's going on, but how the hell is Trabuco just absent of all of this? He doesn't get mentioned. So what do you like? Do you have any good ideas about why that is?
I think that dude ran to Singapore and he's hiding in Singapore.
But he would get mentioned, no?
He's
Like that's the
he's
thing.
mentioned
It's
in
like
the
he
transcripts, and he's on the.
okay.
If you look at the exhibits where they have the Slack channels, he's
Mm,
CC'd on them. So he had exited.
mm.
Like I always had a suspicion that maybe he left before like Alameda went upside down and or FTX went upside down. But then these court transcripts are saying the opposite. It's like no, they were obviously stealing money, going negative. And shout out to them because they had every cheat code in the book and they still ended up with a negative $8 billion position, which is just well done.
Unfathomable.
Well done
Yeah.
in their 20s or whatever. It's just like, man, that's the great. I mean, you talk about the greatest traders of all time. That has to be the biggest one. I mean, it took skill. I mean, because it
You
was.
know what I wish?
Go ahead.
Well, I wish, as a U.S. citizen, there was a period in time where I, just, chucked on a VPN and put like $1,000 in a random FTX account, under John Doe or whatever. But there was like kind of rough limits. I'm sure you could get around it or whatever. I just wasn't willing to like risk that in the case of like, shotgun KYC. So, I did use FTX US, just tried it out, but the suite of derivatives on FTX.com was it truly impressive. The move contracts and the synthetic 3x bull, 3x bear stuff.
Yeah.
And from in hindsight, I've just talked to some people as well, and they were like, man, there was nothing better than trading like the move contracts and some of the vol tokens and stuff and synthetic derivatives on FTX because like, evidently they were just, they had some like pretty basic like, Python code that was running these things. And people like for the synthetic tokens for the DeFi indices and all that stuff, I think they had like a set date, like every single day or set time where they would like roll these and reposition and rebalance. And so people were just making a killing, like front running these like synthetic derivative tokens and all that. And like also whenever they listed a perp, it was like down only. And it's
Yes.
like,
Yes.
man, like what it like
That's what
I
Alameda used to do. I think is you would
oh
watch
yeah.
stuff before they'd run it up, accumulate it, and as soon as that perp hit, they would just liquidate it. And it's like, okay, okay, Alameda, that's really what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, that's like the biggest VC scam, right? It's like, don't worry, guys. Like, we have locked tokens. Like, we are aligned with our community. And then instantly, this shit token gets listed on FTX, and funding rates are like negative 0.3%, like per 8 hours. You know what I mean? So it's like 100% annualized or whatever. And you're like, wait a second,
Oh, yeah.
you don't believe in shit. You just sold off your entire bag. Like,
That's what
can you
happened
imagine
with
VCs are like, wait, I get to have a derivative I can dump my private equity on? This is amazing. It's like,
that's how Salami got exposed. He dumped the ocean tokens on one of those agreements when he was supposed to like keep it, and Salami told him like pound sand, and Ocean went like public with it, and they're like, dude, we got be careful of these dudes, they're dirty. And then for like 2 weeks straight, you saw Ocean. I think it was Ocean. You saw it get shorted into the ground for like 2 weeks, and you're like, okay, so this is what they're all about. Like this is the true strength of Alameda if you piss them off. And they're like, this is downright impressive because like my normal like rainbow reversals and stuff like that, it was painting all the colors like it has to bounce, and it just fucking held. I was like, good
yeah,
God, these dudes are just ruthless.
yeah. Like this isn't a market. Like, it's like RSI is like 1. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah, yeah.
oversold in every time frame, and it's just like never bounces.
Just
You're like,
holding,
what
and
the
you're like,
heck?
okay, yeah, they're trying to kill it, and it's like, damn, dude. We got a question in the chat. One of my OGs, Malifestro, he wanted to ask you is, what are your thoughts on that? Because inflation is hot, people are moving into things that tend to give better yield because ES is giving less solid or reliable gains. An example, CDs give 5%, so you want 10% or more on risk. Thus, go into something like BTC.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. You know, like again, for the first time in however many, like 15 years, you know, or yeah, '07, right? You have a real yield, right? This is the Fed funds rate. You know, like the short end, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year, even T-bills are basically a blended average of expected Fed fund futures. The long end is a bit different, you know, inflation expectations, growth, all that. But the short end's just, you know, Fed fund futures. And so for the first time ever, you know, again, if you believe the CPI numbers and the forward inflation expectations, you can get, you know, a positive real yield, right? And so I think it's pretty interesting when you look at, I don't have the stuff in front of me for trading view, but you're looking at like equity risk premiums or like expected earnings yield. And you know, expected earnings yield for like an S&P 500 index, you know, with forward earnings is like what, 6%, 6%, 7%, something like that. And relative to fixed income, both short end and long end, the long end being more comparable to equities, right? Who have multiples and they're valued, you know, 10 years into the future. But both short and long end bond yields are basically on par with equities with none of the risk, right? And again, I know that, you know, fixed income, the long end has duration risk. There's obviously an inflation risk component to this, but they're similar with equities. I guess you'd be a bit more insulated in equities. But I do think at the margin, you're going to see, you know, and one of the things that's impressed me in 2023 was the massive outperformance of equities relative to bonds, as bonds completely reversed, sold back to their 2022 lows or highs in yield terms. You saw the NASDAQ go berserk. And it's like, you know, I was beating home the drum of like, this is like this divergence. Maybe I'm wrong, but this divergence can't last forever. And I think that's relatively kind of what's happening, right? Like we're seeing a pretty decent reversal of fixed income today. What is it? Treasury yields. Hold up. Why is my thing not working? Treasury yields. Yeah, I mean, not too big of a move, but you know, the 30-year is at 4.8. It's off the highs a bit. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, the fixed income's pulling a bit of capital from equities. And I think at a certain point, maybe we see an inflation kind of a reignition. But there's also, you know, like I think Bitcoin's a bit different, right? It's just so liquid. It's like you know, and then we're still 50% off the highs. But the supply is tightly held, then it's bonkers. And like try to put $1 million into spot Bitcoin right now, and you're gonna send the price, right? Like it's like so inelastic, and that's obviously like the bull case. But like from an institutional standpoint, you know, these CTAs are repositioning hundreds of millions, hundreds of billions of dollars into fixed income, right? It's just like
Yeah,
completely different for comparing that to like a $700 billion asset. So I'm a bit bearish on equities. I think, and then maybe this is a bold take, but I think in inflation adjusted terms, bonds have most definitely topped for probably multi-generation bond top. So like, here's what I mean. Here's TLT. I'm going to add the, so this is a TLT chart, but then I'm gonna adjust it for dividends. So dividends get reinvested. So this is, because if you compare just a bond chart without readjusting for dividend reinvestment, it's not really like real, because like the whole point is like you're buying for income. So we're going to adjust it for inflation and then adjust it for dividend reinvestment. And then we're also going to adjust for inflation. So here's fixed income, right? We're at what? I mean, 60% from the highs, right? What am I doing here? Price range for all-time highs, 56%, right? So that's fixed income. Do the same for equities. A bit less, 15%. But I think there's a decent possibility. What am I? Geez, I'm pro. Get out of here. I think there's a decent possibility that when you're looking at the S&P 500, we get a decade like this, where this is adjusted for inflation, right? But if you look at this, you get basically a lost 2 decades here. I mean, like, look at this.
Yeah, that's when mortgage
You don't
rates were
break.
what, 15, 20%.
I mean, it's yeah. So it's this is 2.5 decades of no gains in real terms, right? In nominal terms, it's a different story, right? Where nominal terms, yeah, it just continues to go up, right? But that's not telling the real story. So I think equities in nominal terms, like especially if we're in for an inflationary decade, can do okay. But for 40 years here, bonds and equities, and obviously I didn't invest through it all. I'm 22 years old, but from 1980s to 2020 was up only real returns for equities and bonds. A negative correlation between bonds and stocks during equity market drawdowns. So like Ray Dalio just got like filthy rich by every time there was an economic recession. He just levered long to the hilt bonds to hedge his equity position, and he rigged, right? Like that's what every like macro fund manager worth his salt did. And now in an inflationary regime, or even if we're seeing a bit of disinflation now, but like we have a couple wars breaking out. There's escalating geopolitical tension. We see like a commodities cycle kick off after 10, 20, 30 years of nothing. And it's like, okay, well, similar to what we were talking about earlier, the paper versus real asset theme comes back into play here, where like we have a historically consolidated equity market, fixed income's getting killed. A bunch of these equities don't make any money. We have this bloated, passive, financialized economy where everybody's just literally plowing in money into US equities without caring about a price. So it's like, yeah, can equities make a new high, or am I hyper bearish in nominal terms, calling for a 2008 style crash? Like, no, I'm not. But would I be surprised at all if 7 years from now you look and equities go flat in inflation adjusted terms? No, not at all. Right? Like, I don't think it's the path to infinite riches anymore. It's just buying the Nasdaq with every spare penny you have and going to bed. Right? I think we're more in a stock pickers market probably. And obviously, I'm saying that with someone that didn't live through it all, but just kind of putting my 2 cents out there.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned up was like the tensions. That was one question I had in the Discord. They wanted me to ask you is if things keep escalating with say like Russia and this Israeli conflict, does that change the outlook of like what the goals of investment should be in a wartime like that? One of the things is like, would that be the thing that actually pops off like a gold and silver run? Um, I
Yeah.
in my opinion, the opportunity for gold and silver to run is kind of already hit, and it really didn't take off. But I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm much more aligned with the gold thesis than the silver thesis, and maybe that's just pretty simple take, but I think gold as a monetary asset, just the properties of it, just more relatively scarce. Kind of a meme, but like I actually put weight into this as like a fundamental view, like higher stock to flow, right? So it's like gold is more like a monetary asset. Central banks buying it, nations buying it, boomers buying it, whereas silver is more of like an industrial metal. Like if anything, honestly, and I'm not too well versed in the thesis. I've done a few hours of work on it. I think uranium is a super interesting narrative and trade. And like the chart's obviously pretty beautiful. But like you're looking at uranium miners and all that,
Yeah,
and just like the nuclear transition and all of that. And there's a structural shortage. Like I think that's a super 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 interesting investment thesis. And that maybe it's a bit bearish on the world prospects, but in a geopolitical conflict, geostrategic conflict, uranium's obviously going to be a pretty valuable thing. Not to say like nuclear war, but like they're just like Russia saying nope, we're not going to export any, like all that. So I think from like a commodities kind of play, uranium's a bit more. I'm not really interested in buying silver or really gold for that matter. But if Bitcoin didn't exist, I would be Peter Schiff 2.0. And so I can see the gold thesis. Like I wish there was gold perpetual swaps, because like I would go pretty levered long, but they obviously don't exist. So
FTX was around, they'd have them.
Yeah,
All the random.
I think they did. Did they not have a gold
I
token?
don't know, but they had the election tokens. So I was like, if they had the election tokens, anything's possible.
The Trump coin, Trump token.
What? Yeah. The, that's another thing. You mentioned if Bitcoin doesn't exist. I know you're a
We'd be
BTC
fucked.
maxi, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, I always get people always argue with me like, why do you like Ethereum? Why do you like these other altcoins and stuff? And I was like, Bitcoin's the best apple there is, right? But Ethereum's an orange. Like it's not the same thing at all. But at the same time, I do get the idea that like there's probably not a need for 10,000 different tokens. I really don't need cryptocurrency to fight forest fires. But I was curious, like, what are your thoughts overall? I guess on like Ethereum and like the state of like the alt market that's brewing for the next bull run.
Yeah. No, I mean, I joke around, and I would definitely say I'm, a maximalist, and I poke fun at the altcoiners and whatever. And I think, a vast majority of them, and them, not like it's some homogenous group, but like of the people that are kind of like the maximalists for Ethereum and all that, I think they missed the boat a bit. But from, if you're a trader that's just trading price action on any asset, and you're like, yeah, like I like altcoins because they're volatile and liquid and they have spreads, and like I have no problem with that. I'm not like dogmatic or you're gonna attack your character for that. From a thesis perspective and like a technology perspective, I think it's super interesting because essentially because of the instant liquidity. And by the way, for context, this shit show of a chart in front of me is the cryptos denominated in Bitcoin, the top 10 cryptocurrencies denominated in Bitcoin. The ETH, BNB, and I don't know the third one are the top two, and then Solana's the one that said 73%. And it's been pumping, obviously. But I think you have this kind of this massive incentive because of the instant liquidity, and the kind of the monetary alchemy, if you will, of these altcoins for actual tech development. And is 99.9% of it useless? Yes, right. DeFi tokens and all this stuff, but it's cool in theory, and in practice, you do have this, similar to like, all right, maybe a bit different, but like in the 90s, right, in the 80s, you have these cypherpunks that are just doing it because they're trying to create like military grade cryptography and privacy, technology, right, at the cutting edge. And this one guy named Satoshi comes in and puts it all together and creates Bitcoin, right? Where these altcoins kind of take a little bit of like they kind of copy paste that, fork that. I know it's fundamentally different. Like Vitalik comes out with the Ethereum virtual machine and Solidity, and they create all this this functionality. You create basically Turing complete machine, the ability to do any computation on chain. And because of that, similar to like the fork wars in Bitcoin, you come into this problem of scaling where it's like, okay, great, like is Ethereum a world computer? Like, no, but you can do computation to a much greater extent on Ethereum than you can do on Bitcoin. Smart contracts, DeFi, token swaps, issuance, whatever. These complex financial derivatives, prediction markets, whatever it may be. But it's pricey, right? Every time there's an NFT surge or a meme coin or DeFi summer, all of a sudden people get priced out of using Ethereum, except whales or people that are super rich, right?
Yeah.
So you see all of these forks, right? You see all of these second layers. You see Solanas of the world, right? Which makes total sense. Like BNB and Avalanche and Tron, right? These are just like EVM forks, right? And they're all kind of cross compatible, but they're all trying to solve for like the scaling issue, right? And Ethereum comes out with these roll-ups, right? These EK roll-ups and all that stuff. And so I think what's the fascinating thing for me is that you have this massive experiment going on where a lot of these tokens, as I'm showing in front of you, are some of them in this group of 10 might make an all-time high against Bitcoin. I'm very skeptical of that reality, but there's going to be a whole group of shit coins that pump super hard from basically a zero valuation against Bitcoin in a bull market. There's going to be a frenzy. Who knows what the next kind of cutting edge of innovation or stupidness or mania is?
Hamster racing.
But from yeah, that was funny. that whole craziness earlier in the year. But from there, I think what's really, really interesting, and I don't know if you've seen this, and I'm not the most technical person in the world, but I do read a lot of it and try to understand it all. Is this guy just came out with this thing called BitVM, right? And he basically takes what they were developing on Ethereum with the ZK rollups and the zero knowledge proofs and all of that, and was like, oh shoot, we can actually use some of this tech on Bitcoin, and figured out essentially how to make a virtual machine off chain Turing complete. They haven't built up the whole coding language or anything. It's far from a complete project, but he just solved a binary computation off chain and used kind of validity and fraud proofs on chain to make sure to basically peg it to the Bitcoin blockchain, and it worked. And he put out a proof of concept, and some people have experimented on it, and they're on the cutting edge. But it was like, whoa, basically the entire, like, the block size war for Bitcoin was this massive battle on, okay, we need to scale this thing. And some group was saying, okay, let's just make the blocks much bigger. Moore's law and the semiconductor efficiency and storage of compute is going exponential. We can just make the blocks size bigger. And the one cohort was saying, no, we can't compromise on any of these rules because it opens up Pandora's box for changing stuff later. So we'll SegWit, and they'll scale with Lightning, and we'll scale off chain and batch transactions, yada yada. And I think Ethereum, while they maybe didn't have an explicit fork war, they had the DAO stuff, but it was more of kind of a culture war, or implicitly, with all these other tokens, which all had their own monetary value and market cap. Of, okay, we're going to scale this compute, and we're going to scale it on chain. We're going to scale all of it on chain. And I think the thing that very few people are paying attention to is the possibility that we have this pristine asset that most people regarded as a pet rock. And because of that, all of the traders, and not all the traders, but a lot of the traders and 99% of the dev mind share went to the other cryptos, because it's like, you can't do anything with Bitcoin. And like, I totally get it, right? Why would I code open source on Bitcoin core GitHub and go nowhere and just like waste my time when I can go build on a DeFi app and make $1 million in YAM tokens, right? Like, why? That makes total sense as someone that's a Solidity developer or someone that's a computer science guy. And so, but the real interesting thing is that it was always a meme too, of like, we'll build it on Bitcoin, and who knows exactly how it plays out. But now we actually have, which no one thought was possible as of like a month ago, we have a real way someone figured out, which no one had ever done, to run a Turing complete virtual machine off chain, and it can be potentially infinite looping. You can do a trillion bits of computation, coin flips or chess match, or in theory a derivatives contract, or some form of betting or whatever it may be. And then you can peg it back on chain. It can be, you can think of, like, it could be a side chain, or it could be some sort of peg, or some sort, like, the ideas are potentially limitless. I think there's a real potential for a Cambrian explosion of sorts of activity. Who knows if it's, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be rug pulls and tokens and all this other stuff, but actual, like, genuine financial application and all the stuff that was built on the DeFi's of protocols of the world on Bitcoin. And I think that's like a super interesting idea that no one thought was possible, like, quite literally a month ago. The whole drive chain debates, and like, okay, we have WBTC on Ethereum, right? And I've used the Aaves of the world. I've used Uniswap, Aaves. I've used like back in 2021, early 2022. I was like, yeah, I'll try out Solana's like DEX ecosystem. It's pretty shitty, and the chain would always go down. But like, I tried Mango Markets, you know what I mean? Because like, I'm interested in how it works, right? Just as someone that's like likes Bitcoin and likes looking at all this stuff. But it was obviously still kind of janky and a bit of an experiment. But I think this stuff's going to really, really accelerate. And I'm sure, like, whether it's Solana or whatever else, some of these alts are going to go bonkers, right? And like, Bitcoin's liquidity is going to just, Ethereum's going to go up, and all this other stuff's going to go up, and it's going to be this, virtuous loop of gambling and mania and all that other stuff. I totally get that. The institution, I think the avenue is a bit different though with the spot ETF, right? It's not money going to offshore crypto exchanges and then flooding in. It's like money going in on Wall Street whales and then on Wall Street rails and then kind of dispersing outwards. So it's a little bit of a different fund flow. And honestly, I'm like pretty bearish on like ETH BTC. Who knows if that reverses here? But structurally, just from a flows perspective, all that other stuff, I think the narrative is very strong for Bitcoin relative to ETH and all that stuff. So I kind of rambled there, but I do think there's going to be another kind of crypto cycle, right? I don't think crypto's dead, but I think the Bitcoin narrative is heavily, or the flows, the fundamentals, and the narrative all line up here really well for Bitcoin relative to the rest of crypto. And obviously, that pendulum swings the other way eventually. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited. Like I've never been someone that like thinks lower of people because they like alts or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like I totally get it. I totally get the incentives. I totally get the the illiquidity for traders, the volatility, right? It's like I can just basically get leverage exposure to this quote unquote asset class by holding some spot token that has the $500 million market cap. Like I get it. Bitcoin's not going to 1,000x from here, or it might, but what's the dollar worth in that scenario? So I get it. But I'm not. I don't really have any crypto bags or whatnot. I just like to kind of casually observe.
Gotcha. One thing you mentioned there that I haven't heard probably more than 5 people mention is the cypherpunks, because that goes way back. And what is your theory of who is actually or was actually Satoshi?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I don't honestly I have no idea. I've entertained a couple things like, how I don't think so. I saw this. There was an interesting thesis on this guy. I forget his name. He had long hair. There was an interesting thesis there on. Geez, he had his hands in a lot of the stuff from the cypherpunks, and he's never really mentioned. And it was kind of unveiled a few years back, but I don't think that lines up as well. I was with Adam back in Amsterdam, and this guy, we were talking, and this guy came up, and I don't think Adam's Satoshi at all. He obviously invented Hashcash, or the hashing algorithm for SHA-256 for proof of work. But some guy came up to Adam. We were having a talk. We were about to have a panel in like an hour, so we were just catching up and throwing some ideas around. And some guy was like, "Satoshi, can I get a picture of you?" And Adam was just kind of like, "Sure." Like he was like, "I imagine he's gotten that so much." And he's like, "Yeah, you can get a picture." Like, he's a great guy, but I don't really know. Do you have an answer? Like, who do you think it is?
I have my favorite one is, well, I say favorite because it's such a who knows, right? But I think my favorite one is Paul Salatsky. That's the only one that makes sense to me, other than Hal Finney. If you don't know, he's the guy who invented TrueCrypt. So he was the guy who single-handedly created like the first encryption program for the public. And there's a lot of like smoking guns that kind of hint like he had some fake passports that were really close to the name Satoshi, and some other things. But he's one of the only guys who like had commercial programming experience with like encryption. I'm like, man, that makes a lot of sense. And then he ended up breaking bad, started selling drugs, and now he's in jail. So it's like, well, the Bitcoin wallets haven't moved because he's obviously in jail. So it's like, this makes sense. I think that's the most fun one.
Wow, I haven't even heard of that one.
Yeah,
I mean, I probably could be like, honestly, and people say this as if it's like a bad thing, but just given like literally the military grade encryption technology and all of that stuff, I could see it being like, someone from like the NSA or something, or like some 3-letter agency and the government kind of going rogue. And like whether it was like, I don't think it was like, but I've heard some interesting like lab leak hypotheses, not like lab leak, but like similar to like the whole COVID thing of like, hey, we're let's experiment with this or that, the other thing, and some rogue programmer was like, oh shit, I could like actually not release it like they had Bitcoin fully fleshed out, but he's like, had some aha moment, and he's like, shoot, like great financial crisis, this thing, like, whoever it was a visionary, obviously. And like the cookie crumbs of like releasing it on Halloween, right? Like 500 years after Martin Luther, pinned this declaration on the front of the church, and like the chancellor's brink on the last chancellor on the brink of another bailout from banks on January 3rd, right? Like all that stuff is like, whoa, this guy was like so tuned in, and
It feels
by
organic. It doesn't
chance,
feel like a lab leak.
it's
Like that type
yeah,
of stuff
yeah,
is like, hey, that's initial message in the first block. It's like,
yeah. This guy was visionary.
and I think it's, I don't know, it's I Hal defended that he never knew who it was or met him, but at the same time, someone had no, I mean, Bitcoin.org had to be registered under someone's name with a credit card, so that data is out there somewhere. Maybe I don't
That's
know.
it. That's interesting. How would you track that? Like how would one look at that?
Legally, you couldn't because it's like a transaction, like that's not supposed to be public domain. But someone put in a payment to register that domain initially, and I'd assumed it was Satoshi. I don't know who did it, but um, someone had to buy that website, and it also, there's emails with him. Albeit, you can register, especially back in the day, you could register email names and say not reveal who you are, but someone at that admin at that
Yep.
could maliciously look at it and maybe piece it together. But the fact that the wallets haven't moved, I think they're in jail or dead. So it makes me
Yeah.
kind of really think it was Hal, and I think that's a beautiful way to end it. I think because he made the change on the world, and it's there's no releasing it. Like as I love talking Michael Saylor, and Saylor has a lot of cool stuff and a lot of wild stuff, but like his thesis is right. He's like, it's perfect code. It's gonna suck the air out of the room of everything, and that includes fiat and everything else. He's like, it's in
Yep.
the wild. It will become the apex predator. And I'm like, that's true. So I'm a little mixed on like trying to develop on top of it. I know there was a lot of controversy this week with Lightning, and
Yeah.
I I don't know. To me, to me personally, it's like let Bitcoin be Bitcoin. Yeah, okay, it's slow, it's great, whatever. But it's like it's the safe haven. You want to go do transactions? Litecoin's right there. Litecoin's trusted. Like I personally use it for payments. Because at the end of the day, I want to hold Bitcoin. I don't want to hold Litecoin. Like it's
Yep.
like sure you want crypto that's super fast, low fees that exists, and you can do payment transactions. Because people bitch about like Bitcoin not being great for payment processing, and I'm like, dude, I get it. Bitcoin's not meant to buy a cup of coffee. Like that always bugs me when you see these poor baristas sitting there cringing as someone tries to videotape themselves buying Starbucks with Bitcoin. I'm like, this is not the point. Like, this is that's okay, cool. You really need to tip that guy, but damn. Um, so I don't know, but it's the history is always cool, and like, and it's also kind of a beautiful thing is Congress can't call in Satoshi and yell at him or her, right? Like that's Elizabeth
Yep.
Warren would have him in Congress and just yell at him for money laundering. Like that's just how it would be. So I don't know.
Yep. Pretty unique.
I guess another thing is the development side. The one thing I would say though is it may need an upgrade in terms to if quantum computers can crack it. That's the one thing I do
Yeah.
fear. And I don't know where you get around that because as soon as it's cracked, someone could do the damage before the fix could happen. But maybe you could reverse the blockchain back to that block and then start it again. I'm not real sure. But quantum computers seem actually tangible within this decade.
Yeah. I mean, how I think of it is like, well, I mean, I think of Satoshi's coins moving as like an incentive that, or as like a kind of a warning sign of like, okay, if someone ever figures out how to crack SHA-256. But at the same time, though, like, if if someone figures out, or like, you know, government figures out, or just quantum, computing figures out how to crack SHA-256, the world's in a not like a bad place, but there's a lot more problems than just Bitcoin. We're taught if someone figures out how to break military grade encryption. We're Bitcoin and what we do to fork it is one thing. Nuke codes are another.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
every database in literally the world, every encrypted device, like it's all fair game. So like yeah, Bitcoin goes to five SHA 512 or whatever other like kind of hashing algorithm or however it forks or whatever it looks like. I'm not honestly worried about that. Maybe that's super naive, but I don't. I think there's a lot more tangible things out there to worry about.
I'm of the opinion anything past the old Nokia's has been backdoored, but I agree. Like if Bitcoin was hacked, those original wallets would have been moved by now.
Yeah,
Um, the one thing, the fun thing is because I always talk about Zcash because I Zcash is just it paints really pretty colors, so it's easy for me to trade, and it's just everyone absolutely hates it. I saw some people posting about they believe that all the hate on Zcash is actually psyops because it's a privacy coin, so the government actively puts out a media campaign to make it look like an awful altcoin. I was like, that's actually kind of fun. Um, but I at the same time, it's what makes me. I honestly think it's. I think Monero and Zcash are already cracked because those dudes are still walking around. But Tornado Cash, they brought that guy in about what 5 days. They
yep,
extradited him and everything. So I was like, okay, I think Tornado Cash might be one of the only ones they couldn't really mess with, and then they just straight up arrested the dude for open
yeah.
source code. Which
Sad stuff.
yeah, yeah. Another thing they wanted me, or some guys in the chat wanted me to ask you earlier this week. Where did you get the bug? Where did you find out about Bitcoin um, in particular? Like, how did you hear about it? How? Because you've jumped off into the deep end, and there's no coming back, and that's a cool thing. But
Yeah,
something had to bit you pretty hard when you were younger.
yeah, for sure. I was my first touch point was like in the ICO bubble. I was a sophomore in high school, but my cousin was in the whole ICO phase, and I don't know, flipped a few grand into 20 grand or 50 grand, and then round tripped it all, just on worthless stuff. But that was my first touch point. And then I went kind of down a rabbit hole of studying finance and economics when I realized I took chemistry, and I was like, because I was a math guy, science guy, and I took chemistry and was like, this sucks. I hate this. So it's like, okay, well, I guess I'll do numbers, finance, business, whatever. So I just had an open mind to it. I honestly looked up investing podcast and I started listening to Preston, and he was talking about it. Went on Twitter because I had Twitter for sports or whatever else, and found like the Maxi side of Twitter like just by chance. And then I turn 18, and a week later, the bear market ends. Like Bitcoin goes from 3K to 12K in like a month.
Yeah,
And at that same time, like that, I buy literally like one Bitcoin with like my spare change, like working high school job. Bitcoin 4x's, and then right before that moment too, like right after I bought my first touch of Bitcoin, Plan B drops his stock to flow model. And not to be like stock to flow fanboy, but I'm just like a math guy, numbers guy, and I'm like, oh, what do you mean like halvings? And like, wait, what's a difficulty adjustment? And so that just kind of sent me down a whole rabbit hole. And I was looking at this log scale thing, and I'm like, geez, what the hell is
hang
going
on.
on? And so that's where I really dove in full time. And then I did a year at school. I dropped out of college to my parents' disappointment temporarily. They're chill with it now, of course. But yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. So I mean, you got a lot to learn for sure, but have definitely put in an outrageous amount of time around this orange coin thing. So it's been a fun ride so far. I think we're just getting started though.
I do too, and it. Thanks for sharing that because it's also fun. Like it's crypto Twitter is one of the most entertaining things on earth. It's got highs, it's got lows, but like I can't watch TV anymore because you just can't hold a candle to the drama and the funny shenanigans that are happening um, on CT, and it's
Totally
just
agree.
absolutely insane. Not going to name names with the recent stuff, but it's quite fun, needless to say, and it's at the heart. It's I think the mission's true and good. Um,
Totally
and
agree.
I, you know. I think it's I think we're at the tipping point, like you said. Like you say, it's just getting started. Like all the stuff we dreamed about in 2017 is happening. BlackRock's coming. Fidelity offers Bitcoin. Like it's about to go, and the market cycles are coming. And shout out to Stock to Flow. That dude gets so much hate. Oh, his number predicting the future 10 years from now didn't happen, but his timings and everything else that got me deep into like what you said, happenings. Like what is this about? Cycles and all this other stuff, and like questioning of like how far can whales push price? Like that's really what got me started was how far can a capitulation go was how literally how like rainbow trends and like rainbow theory and all that stuff like came to be. It's like what's the limit of Bitcoin? How you can't go to 200K today, but what could you do, right? So it's cool stuff. And just I think that's another thing too is the hive mentality people attack on crypto Twitter, but like I think it's pointless. Just be we're all good dudes. Well, for the most part. Maybe I take that back, but there's a lot of good people and it's a lot of cool stuff, and just we'll see where it's going, because it's like my mom texts me about price, and she's never sold like her entire life, and she literally just buys pain, and they're going to be retiring early because of it. So I'm all for
That
that.
love it. That yeah, I totally agree there. I definitely there's a comedic aspect to it all, but it's kind of fun. Like just thinking about if the thesis is all right, which I believe it is. I mean, I'm all in career wise, basically financially at this point, socially, uh, you know, from a reputation standpoint, like I'm all in on this thesis, and if it's right, it's like a bunch of obscure artists from every corner of the world were telling everybody how it was going to go down, and it happened. Um, and obviously it's not a straight line walk. There's plenty of ups and downs. There's probably still people think this is the fight you stage. I don't even think we're at the fight you stage yet. I think they could throw a hell of a lot more at us. Privacy stuff, and who the hell knows what kind of government level attacks, or you know um, just sort of pushback, to like the hyper Bitcoinization thesis. And people talk, they're like $10 million Bitcoin, and it's like, yeah, well, we have a long way to go to that hypothetical world.
Yeah, yeah.
But you just like it's again, people, it's like they're like, oh, this damn Bitcoiner is always talking about monetary policy and the deficit and MMT. It's like, but they're right. It's like we're on a path that's literally the assumption is just we can perpetually maintain spending more money than we take in, expanding the debt levels, and from a pure math perspective it doesn't work. Like,
No.
I'm 22 years old, I pay social security, I'm never going to get it ever.
And you
And
can't
so
opt
it's
out of
like,
it.
no. And so do I just sit there and vote harder and parade around for red team or blue team and smile and wave, or like do I or and just buy the fucking S&P 500 index with my paycheck and with have an employee match for 2%, or like do I vote for a different system with my capital, because like that's all I can do.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, thankfully we have an avenue for that. We have a vehicle for that. So without it I'd be pretty pessimistic about the world. And Bitcoin doesn't fix everything, right? It's obviously like somewhat of a meme of like Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin doesn't fix a lot of things, but I think what it does do is even if it doesn't a million X from here like it did from 2012 onwards, it does kind of give the user and the individual a lot of sovereignty back in their hands.
No, that's the
And
biggest
that's
thing for me is the sovereignty. Is like there's so many third world countries that are literally it's like I have a bank on my phone now
yeah,
that no one can
that's
deny me
powerful.
from. Like it's there's a lot of third world countries. It's literally it's like they just have a cell phone, they don't have a bank, but that's how they're doing payments, and they've got something that's not a worthless currency that's 2 million. What's the African currency? It's like $2 billion for $1 US.
Zimbabwe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Um, you're obviously busy, and thank you for the time. But one of the things I wanted to kind of close up on is 2024. You're always building, you're always moving around, you're still publishing and doing stuff with like Bitcoin Magazine and all those cool dudes. Like, what should we look for forward to in like the Dylan LeClair timeline coming up? Can if you can share.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I was at, I guess, still the same parent company, but was at Bitcoin Magazine writing for a while. I'm now with their fund, UTXO Management, just Bitcoin fund, Bitcoin adjacent, doing a lot of like kind of quant stuff there. So have my first kind of introduction with coding and stuff this year, leaning on ChatGPT a bunch, but doing a couple like Bitcoin advisory things, on ramp Bitcoin. Basically, I would say it's like a Bitcoin ETF or a trust, but combined with like an on-chain capital multi-sig style. So you can, it's multi institutional custody. You can withdraw your Bitcoin without tax at any point. So I think that's super exciting. I have a small role there, but would love to see BlackRock not take up all of this institutional flow and actually maintain some of this some of the attributes and characteristics of native Bitcoin, but in a Wall Street kind of wrapper, if you will. Doing some stuff with Block Green, which is kind of like mining and hash rate derivatives, which is exciting. I think that's an avenue that's going to be really big in the next bull market. And then, got some projects that still, building in silence about, got plenty of ideas, plenty of aspirations, but, still figuring things out and, not showing my cards too early. But I think there will be some stuff coming down the pipe, hopefully, where I have plenty of things I want to do, and and I'm gonna aim high for sure. And if I score low, then so be it. But yeah, man, I appreciate you. Wow, an hour and 40 minutes kind of ripped by, but it was fun. It was fun chatting back and forth. I honestly, I apologize, but I do need to further check out what you've actually built with Rainbow Trends and all that, because I see you post on Twitter all the time. And especially now that I've gotten into the I'm doing some Pine Script stuff and Python stuff, and
I remember seeing you post about Python, like posting your first book, How to Learn It. I'm like, oh Lord, help him. It's like
yeah,
I don't have the time to learn that one. That's going to be a hell of an adventure. I wish him the best.
I didn't even read the book. Man, I'm just spamming. I'm just spamming ChatGPT, but it's going good. It's going good. I'm learning a bunch, and so it's been fun. But yeah, I'll make sure to check out your stuff. Maybe I don't use Discord much, but maybe I'll hop in the Discord.
Oh, for sure. They're
And
welcome to have
yeah,
you.
dude, it was good. Rip and I we were going back and forth on DMs for a while, and I just was
Dude, we're all
got
busy.
lost in
No
transition.
apologies. And I'm sure I don't even know how Twitter's even usable for you at this point.
Yeah, it's a mess.
The amount of spam and everything else. And it's fun. It's funny is like you just type in Dylan LeClair and there's like 30 of them that pop up. And what one of the things that like actually made me laugh out loud one day is some of them screwed up the orange and they have red dots next to them. It's just like, man, that's fantastic. And I've always joked about this, but I think you should do it because I think it'd be funny. It's like you should slightly alter your profile picture just to see if it translates to all the copies. It's like randomly add sunglasses or something to it, just see if they do it. 'Cause, man, the bots are
I have
bad.
to. Yeah, you didn't really fix much, but what else?
All right, man. Well, thanks for coming on. Hop off, and thanks for everybody who hopped on stream. I'll get this archived on YouTube as well. I know this is on Twitch, but thanks for all that hopped on the normal time, and I'll talk to you guys later.